Howdy Meeps, and welcome to the Meeple Syrup Show.
Meeple Syrup Show, it is Wednesday at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time or Daylight Time or whatever we're on. And we're back with another episode. Today we have with us the wonderful Kathleen Mercury and the equally wonderful Chris Rowlands with an S. And they're here to join us to talk about some design stuff. So we're digging into design. But before we get to them, let's talk about the guy all the way to that way on the screen. It's all reversed, right? So he's that way. Oh, Jesse, you're hiding. The guy with the big hair. Jesse's back!
Hey, I'm back. Yeah, that's right. I'm back. I'm in Canada. And I'm here to stay for a little bit. So yeah, it's super exciting. Didn't expect to be on tonight, but the road trip went good. And Erica needed to recuperate and prepare for Proto-TO this weekend. So I'm making an early reappearance. I'm excited to be here and excited to be able to chat with these two. I was eager to watch tonight's episode. I've got prototypes all over the table. I was going to do my classic work and listen to a podcast, but now I get to grill them. So that's exciting.
It's all good. So let's get started. Can we start with Chris? Chris, tell us who you are, what you do, and what's your speciality?
Well, my name is Chris Rowlands. I am a game developer and producer at Funko Games. Our game studio was formerly called Force Presenting Creative, also go by the pen name Prospero Hall. We're sort of known in the hobby sphere for doing games like Disney Villainous, Jaws, Horrified. Those are all published by Ravensburger. We've also done stuff like Choose Your Own Adventure with Asmodee and Z-Man. But now we're kind of branching off on our own. Our studio was acquired by Funko earlier this year, so now we're the Funko Games team, and we're going to be coming out with a Funkoverse strategy game in about a week or so. So I'm a game designer. I've done a little bit of producing on projects at our studio. A producer is kind of like a creative project manager. And I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. And Kathleen, moving over to you. What's up?
How are you?
I'm fine.
Cool. My name is Kathleen Mercury. I am a middle school teacher, but I have spent the last 13 years teaching game design to kids. And I think somewhere around 700 something games that I've helped kids design from scratch into prototype form. I design games. I've got one that's going on Kickstarter next year with Colossal called Ragnarok. And I've got a couple other prototypes, going in the hopper, various stages of development and at different stages, I guess. And I provide all my teaching resources for free at kathleenmercury.com. So if someone wants to teach game design to kids, please take my resources, use them, do them better than me, and then tell me all about it on Games in Schools and Libraries or on Board Game Broadcast.
Those are two great podcasts that Kathleen is part of, and some of them are video casts as well, right? So
yes.
They're really good. If you are a teacher, you want to be linked into those. They're great. Tonight, we're talking specifically, though, about getting over those design humps. So we're digging into design, and we're talking about how we keep afloat, how we just keep swimming, a little Dory action. And Jesse, you had talked at the start of the show, before we actually started, about different areas of design processes and the barriers and the choke points. That was one thing that you really wanted to talk about. So can you start us off from your perspective? What are the choke points that you find right at the beginning?
Well, I mean, having an idea in the first place, right? And so this is something we've talked about before on the show, but it's, I find you go through ebbs and flows in your creative process. And when you design lots of games all the time, every once in a while, you find yourself in these moments where you need to start working on something. And you may even have a project scoped on the table, like, oh, I need to work on this IP, say, if you're with a creative group like Funko, or if you've been asked by a publisher, or if you see there's a call like, oh, this publisher that I'd really love to work with is interested in this certain type of Euro game or a game that looks like this. And so you sit down and you get a pen and you get a piece of paper and you say, hey, I've designed 50 games so far. I can design another game. And you've got crickets in your head. And so I think that's the first and probably one of the most common blocks that designers run into. And so I'm curious, what do you do, Kathleen, and then Chris, when you're really just want to get started on something and are in desperate need of ideas?
Well, for me, there's nothing better than just that sort of like euphoric sort of rush of like having an idea that you're excited about, and especially when you know it's going to be good, and that doesn't always work out that way. But one thing for me, like it's always sort of like low burner, back burner on the back of my head in terms of what's something that I could gamify, because I tend to start thinking about things that are real world and then how I can gamify them. I tend to go from that direction. But when it comes to like, I'm wanting an idea, like for me, honestly, it has to kind of make me laugh, or there has to be something about it that really appeals to me personally. But it also just depends too, because I also really like design constraints. If you said, Kathleen, go make me a game, I don't know, but if you say, Kathleen, I need you to make me a worker placement game about celery, I'm like, cool, I'm on it. You know what I mean? I like to have boundaries so I can push them as much as possible. So for me, when it comes to coming up with ideas that like get me excited and going, I have to be able to see boundaries quickly for myself, or set boundaries for myself, which is really hard. But once I have an idea of kind of like the scale and scope and like the space the game is and where I'm going to be working, then I can really start to move forward and make process. So for me, so much of it when I don't have an idea is coming up with that thing that really hooks me. And then two, figuring out like, I know there's this idea that I want and I have no idea how to do it. And the sooner I can narrow that down, the sooner I can really get to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think my personal process kind of mirrors Kathleen in a lot of ways. For me, as someone who works at a studio, and previously when we were Prospero Hall, we were all about creating projects for clients, and we were a studio that was working on anywhere between 30 and 40 games a year, active like greenlit projects. But beyond that, I mean, we would go to Asmodee and we would pitch them 20 game ideas, and from those ideas they would kind of cull those down, and so for us it's kind of it's a lot of different things. It's one thing. Sometimes people will come to us with a project and they say, make a game based on this IP, and you automatically sort of have these constraints that Kathleen's talking about. And I'm the same type of designer where I like to just know what my parameters are and then try to solve the problem of fitting something into those parameters. I think it really helps kind of focus me. But we've also been, asked to just come up with ideas out of the blue. And at our studio, we have a couple different ways of going about doing that. And one thing that we always keep track of is something, we have a base camp set up and we have something called Blue Sky. And Blue Sky is somewhere where if you have any idea, whatever it could be, you go to Blue Sky and you write it down and you catalog it there. And then other people can kind of see what's in Blue Sky, and we can kind of pull projects or ideas from there. But the other thing that's really, I think, unique and part of like the special sauce of what made our studio so successful on the mass market, outside of like some of our more better known hobby games, is that we would actively seek out ideas anywhere. And today, while I was at work, I put a message out to some of my other coworkers asking them the same kind of question of how they kind of worked through some roadblocks. And so I'm going to kind of mention some of the ideas that they've had. And Stephanie Straw talked about something that we do a lot at Forest Prezan, and that's just go to a boutique store and start looking for just trends or looking for ideas that pop up. And for example, we did a game with Asmodee called Skulk, and it's sort of like this geometric, rose gold skull, like marble holder that spits out marbles, and we built a game around that. But that whole idea was like, hey, rose gold is really popular. What could we do with rose gold?
Interesting.
And a lot of the times our projects kind of stem from these really strange things. It's like, hey, what if a game package had a liquid pouch on it? What kind of game would go in a box with a liquid pouch? And those types of kind of weird, crazy ideas. And that game ended up becoming Catlantis, that we did with Ravensburger. It didn't have a liquid pouch on the box, but that's where that game idea came from, right? Is someone had the idea of these cats floating in the liquid and like mermaid cats. I don't know, it was really weird. But I think that's one of the things that always sort of I think about, because a lot of times people talk about inspiration and they talk about like mechanisms versus themes, and if you're a theme first or mechanism first designer. And to me, it's more about just finding that thing that inspires you. And that goes back to what Kathleen says, is it's like, I could hear a joke and be like, oh, that's a funny joke or that's a funny pun. What is that game? And
Right.
and I think that's kind of the key.
Yeah, Ragnarok was originally called Dirty Birdie, and it was about pigeons dropping poop cubes all over a city, wiping out people. And that was inspired by a Girl Scout song. Oh, I wish I was a little dirty birdie. And it goes basically, yeah. And then,
Nice.
yeah. And then the current game that I'm really excited about working on right now is one called Valkyrie. And that's one that I was asked to make a game last year based on Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And that game didn't go, but I came up with a very specific style of tiles. And then I just had these tiles when the project, didn't work. And then it's like, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And I feel like that was such a big step forward for me as a designer, because it was, here's these things. How do I make a game out of this? As opposed to, here's the theme. How do I gamify that? And so I think one of the most important things is, you have to stretch yourself and you have to challenge yourself, because I always thought, like, tell me a world and I'll figure out a way to gamify that. But to go from that, like, mechanics first, whatever, that perspective was so important towards not just making that game work, but also like building your confidence to just try other things, because we all have limited time, I mean, I teach, so there are days when I just come home and like collapse. So to like, okay, it's work time. Like, I spent my days talking about games. I can't always do that. So I'm just kind of toast, I mean, I'm not 15 games at a time person. When you said 30 to 40 games, I'm like, oh my God, I'm like 2 or 3, you know what I mean? But that's what works for me. I'm not hired to do this professionally. So I think in a lot of ways, you just have to, just try more than what you think you can do, but also listen to yourself and know who you are and what you are.
Yeah, I think, our studio I can't imagine working on 30 to 40 games at a time. But that's one of the benefits of working with a studio, is that we all can kind of lean into one another and kind of come up with these ideas. Another sort of thing that came up a lot in the responses we were getting, like Deirdre, our head of production, said it in our little Slack channel. But what she likes to do is, if she's really stuck on a problem of for example, trying to say like, well, we want to come up with like a children's game, and we know that we want to pitch, 10 children's games this year or whatever. And we're really stuck on ideas. She likes to take walks and kind of just get out of the normal environment. And, but she's really passionate about taking walks with purpose. And so she'll say like, I'm going to take a walk and I want to, think about children's games and think about what inspires me about children's games. And it's, our studio happens to be kind of in an area of Seattle where there's like, playgrounds and stuff, so you can walk around, you can kind of like put yourself in the mind of a child if you want. We also, there's all sorts of stimulus around. But I think that's kind of an interesting way to look at it, is that sometimes, as a designer, and it's different if you're a freelancer or if you're, contracted for a job, but you have to kind of spur that creativity. You can't always wait to be inspired. You have to actively try to pursue those types of things and find what works for you. It's such a personal process, but
Right.
But yeah, and that's why I'm glad to be here, talk to you guys, because I want to know, what you do that works, and maybe that can apply that to some of what I do as well.
Sure. Zach Connolly is saying he plays more games and then tries to make them different types of games. So he was also very vocal about the finding a component that inspires you. So he has one based around gel pens. So a couple really interesting things there. Matt Paquette asked us, do you ever see the game visuals before knowing how it plays? Have you ever done that? Have you ever seen it? Jess, what about you? Have you seen it in your mind's eye? I know this is what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I actually think that, so my way of dealing with creative blocks is to try and start making things, just doing it. And usually that involves trying to make myself see it. I'm usually creatively blocked because I can't do what Matt's describing, which is imagine what the game is going to look like. And so the best inspiration for me is when not to say that these have ever been successful projects, but usually the ones I get running with the fastest is when I do stuff like what Chris was describing, going to stores, but I go to craft stores and I like walking through their laser cut section and I'll buy things. And I'll go home with $10 of randomly shaped laser cut wood pieces. And if I just pick it up and feel the game in my hand, I'll have a prototype in like 30 minutes. Because I can see in my head what the game is going to look like. And now I can start building things to make that reality. And if I can't see what it should look like, I pull up GIMP and I build a basic card frame and I start putting things in place so I get a visual. So I can start getting some visual hooks to work with.
Mm-hmm. Kathleen, what about you? Are you a visual? Do you visualize it first? I guess that's a good question.
Definitively so. I have to be able to see it because I only think in pictures. If you give me math equations, I can do basic math, obviously, but if you give me like complicated algebra, back then I was just so frustrated because I would have to convert it in my head to basically a 3D representation of what we were trying to do, convert that back to numbers so that I could then, do the work that was assigned. And it was exhausting. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so bad at math. I didn't realize that most people don't have to do that. So for me, a lot of my games are very strongly visual, and for me, I have to be able to see it, or I don't move forward with it. If I have an idea and I have a picture in my head, that means I can start moving forward. If I don't have a picture, then it doesn't go anywhere.
Interesting. Chris, what about you? Picture in head. Good thing, bad thing?
Yeah, I think that good thing or bad thing is an interesting question, because I think you could get too focused on something if you're stuck on what you think it should be and it's not quite fitting that could also stymie you in a way. But again, like, it's a really personal thing for me. I lean more towards kind of what Zach mentioned actually in the chat, where he was saying that he gets inspired by playing other games. For me, I like to identify things or decisions that I think are really interesting, or components of other games that are really interesting, and then really think about those kind of stretched out and seeing how they might apply to other things. When it comes to my actually building or starting to prototype something, I'm a very rapid prototyper, because I'm also kind of in Jesse's camp a little bit, where I need to actually touch pieces and move them around to see how they function. We have designers at our studio that are much more big picture. Aaron Dono is a good friend of mine, one of our designers. He was really integral on our Villainous game, for example. He kind of takes a step back, and a lot of times he does it in the shower, but he'll take a step back and he'll be like, what is this whole game like? And he can think of it in his head, and he has the whole sort of framework in his head. And obviously that changes, but the blueprint is there, where I'm much more of give me one little thing to kind of chew on for a bit, and then I'll kind of slowly build upon that or explore that. But that's another interesting thing that's with our studio that's kind of unique, is that at Prospero Hall / Funko Games, we have 30 to 40 employees, and we have graphic designers and illustrators on staff that are part of our company. And so if I have an idea or for a game, we can have a graphic designer and illustrator mock up what that box cover looks like, and then I see the box cover, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, now what does the rest of this game do? So those visuals do absolutely spur that design. But it's not something where I can see the whole game. It's just little visuals that kind of cue me in.
Yeah,
interesting.
Ryan Lockhead of Red Raven Games, first thing he does when he designs the game is he does the box art. He's incredibly talented artist, and then once he has that, then he starts to work on the game, because he said that kind of gives him that set and that feel. And I mean,
it's almost like the cover of a book.
Yeah, and honestly, for me, this isn't necessarily always a good thing. As far as there's this game idea that I have right now. I have a strong visual in my head, ideas about certain mechanics and stuff. But in some ways, because it's really challenging for me to sort of be logical about it. Sometimes it's a long, slow road towards making a prototype. And I'm jealous that Chris has such a team, because my boyfriend's a published designer, but we don't design well together. We're very, very different, and that's okay. That's good. It just means we don't force it. But the person who I've worked with most recently, where I felt like really like good sense working together, lives 3 hours away, and so that's really hard, because especially for someone like me who likes to have those parameters, when I'm on my own, just kind of trying to muddle it out, like I feel like I'm in a fog a lot of the times.
Sure. So I think Kathleen's heard the story, and Jesse might as well, but my story about visualization is that it actually hinders me in a lot of ways, because I build the perfect game in my head, and then I get locked into that. And this is what has plagued me since I was a little kid. And I had a teacher set me aside and say, hey, this is why you never finish your projects, because I would never hand things in, because they would be perfect in my head, and I was not skilled enough to actually make them into what I saw in my head, because they were perfect. And so now I've grown up and I've gotten past that, and I will like put stuff on paper and rip it up and cut it apart and things like that. But the younger me was not at all like that. And so now I think I'm at a happy medium where I can actually visualize games in my head. Like Erica and I are working on one together that we basically talked about for like maybe an hour, visualized it, and it's pretty much done. Like the game works really well. It just needs to be tweaked and balanced now. And so the visualization for me helps. And like you, Kathleen, I'm a very visual person. But then it's the putting it on the paper and trying it out and testing it and playing it and proving that something is good or not so great. That's the next step for me. And I guess it goes along with another bottleneck area that Jesse identified, which is playtesting. How do you guys work on playtesting? So this is a good one for the difference between, again, a studio versus freelancers. We'll start with Chris, because you've kind of got this really good setup at Funko.
So when you're talking about bottlenecks of creativity during playtesting, what exactly are you asking with that question? Like, what sort of bottlenecks are you picturing? So I can get kind of more of a.
Oh, I mean, it could be anything. It could be anything that you think is a bottleneck, and they may be different for you than they are for Kathleen because of just difference in game style, difference in availability of resources. So, is there a bottleneck in playtesting for you, Chris? And if so, what is it?
So I think that, to me, if I'm understanding the question correctly, or the area of the design we're talking about, I think the biggest bottleneck that occurs during playtesting is when you're trying to determine, what sort of feedback to apply to your game, and what sort of stimulus to that feedback you're getting from people, how to apply that to your project, what feedback to listen to, what feedback to ignore, those types of things. And for me, I think that a lot of it is trying to always be mindful that our games are created for other people. That one of the things I've said a lot about, and I think Aaron has talked about it, I think Sen has actually even talked about it a little bit, is that really, as a game designer, my most important element that I can bring to the table is like empathy and understanding the experiences that the players who are experiencing my game have. And so when I'm looking at a playtest, more so than what they're telling me for feedback, is I'm looking for cues into how they're expressing their feedback, or to how they're experiencing the game. But ultimately, again, this is where I sort of lean on the team that we have at Funko Games, because we have a lot of different perspectives that are there. And I think that, if I got playtest feedback, if I was a freelance designer and I got playtest feedback from someone, and, I could kind of like codify it, I think it is important to maybe perhaps run that sort of feedback through other designers or other people that other gamers to kind of see what they feel about those types of things. Because a lot of times, and it was kind of mentioned in the comments, is we can kind of be precious with our ideas, and it's good to kind of be jostled out of that occasionally. And you need to have people who you trust to give you, their honest feedback when it comes to those types of things.
Yeah, I think it was Matt Paquette who's asked, how strongly do you cling to your original idea? How much do you resist modifying your initial design, right? So
yeah, and so it's tough. Like it's a two-pronged it's a two-pronged problem, because in one hand, like, you have a vision for the game and you kind of know what the experience you're trying to create, but you also have to react to the experience that people are having. And sometimes it's like, well, the experience they're having might even be better than what I was trying to create in the first place. Like, you can get positive playtest feedback as well that is unexpected. So it's definitely a difficult thing, and I think that it requires you to play a lot of games and really get out of your head and try to experience what other people are experiencing.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things that Chris is like, I'm like bobbing my head, like I'm on an ocean. I mean, why I teach game design for my gifted kids is so that they can learn to deal with imperfect, unfinished, everything that Sen was talking about, how Sen was as a kid. I have those kids now, and I'm trying to help them get over this hump while they're younger, as opposed to like letting them think that A+ is all there is to success. But the big thing that I do is I use the Stanford Design School method of prototype design, and it starts with empathy, understanding the needs of your user. And I consider it such a success when my students go from being so afraid to show their games to other people to being mad when other kids don't have their feedback forms. They're like, where's my feedback form? You play tested my game yesterday. Like, I want my feedback. And one of the most common things I say at the end is, what did you learn from this? You'll take to other things is, if I'm having trouble with something, then I can ask other people for help and they can help me make my idea better. I mean, for 13-year-old gifted kids, that's really huge, and I think that's also really huge for a lot of us. I think you have to have a certain amount of flexibility. You can have a passion project, you can be just so in love with it, but at the end of the day too, when it comes to games, you have to make a product that sells. So what Chris is saying about understanding the needs of your user, one of the people that I've learned the most from is John Brieger, who's a professional developer. Go to his website. He's got an article about observational research, because he actually started designing Apple stores when he was 22 years old, all about creating that experience. And all the things that he learned from that experience, he then applies. And in a lot of ways, it almost doesn't matter what you wanted in the game, what you liked, how are people responding to it? And if there's one aspect that people are really, really enjoying and not necessarily the rest of it, maybe you should consider leaning hard into that. And like I said earlier, my game, Dirty Birdie, was signed as Dirty Birdie, and it's now Dragons, and it looks nothing like the game. It's definitely several significant iterations down the road from what I sold, but on the other hand is, if I want to see this hit the market as a product, then I have to be willing to make changes. I have to figure out ways to be excited about these changes. I have to be willing to make these changes something I'm as equally excited about as I was the original game, because I had to cut some things that I did not want to take out. But the game is better as a result. You just, like Chris said, is if it's precious, then you don't want to change it. So with my, fast and cheap prototyping, be willing to see it as a flexible moving thing, not as this is my perfect thing and now all hail. And if somebody doesn't like it, that means they're wrong. I don't think they're the ones that are wrong in that case.
Yeah, it's something that came up a little bit with, in before we kind of went on the air, and we all sort of like mentioned it. And that's the idea that, or I guess the concept that you can have bad ideas and you can explore bad ideas. And to me, while I was getting ready to come on the show, that was the biggest kind of thing that I was thinking about of how I overcome these creative blocks, is that I work at a studio that is so fast paced, and we don't have time to only filter out into good ideas. We have to throw every idea out the table and then see what sticks, because we don't have the luxury of like waiting until we get the perfect idea. And I think in playtesting, you have to realize that nothing that you try to playtest is irreversible. So nothing that you're doing is immutable. So even if like you have like a gut feeling that some mechanism is not quite working, like you have to be like, okay, well, if this mother and her kids, if their experience is accurate, and maybe I disagree with it, maybe I think that was an anomaly, but I can make a prototype that addresses some of their issues, even if it goes against my wishes, just to try it out and see how the next round of playtesting works.
Right.
And if it turns out that I was right all along, and that the original way I had it I think works better, I can always revert back. But you have to give yourself permission to make bad stuff, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and going back to one thing from a story that John told me once was that in his design classes in college, this professor decided to have one class focus on making like one or two things really, really good, and the other class focus on making a lot of different things. And by the time the semester ended, the class that made so much more in terms of volume, their products were so much better because you learn so much every time. And so you have to be willing, and it's hard because, like I said, I'm a couple games at a time kind of person. I don't have 17 different projects or 5 different projects, but having that idea
Yeah.
of like what you're saying in terms of volume, generating so many ideas, because it's like, your first idea is best on a multiple choice test, but not necessarily in life. You know what I mean? Sometimes you really just got to push yourself, and then you just uncover all these little things at the edges that, wait a minute, this might actually be something.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Life's not a multiple choice test.
I spend my life trying to convince children that it is not.
I was mistrained.
Mhm.
So I think that there is something importantly different, though, between your ability, Chris, as a member of this fast-paced studio, to iteratively test every bad idea or many bad ideas to find out whether or not they're good or what like seeds and promise are in each of them, so that you can zero in on a more effective product more rapidly. The big playtesting choke point that at least I have as a freelancer is number of playtests. My upper game on the table between, or at least more far between than I would like. And so I have to both be conscious of the importance of allowing myself to make mistakes and take the game down the wrong pathway, but also do so with sensitivity to the fact that I might only get this thing to the table once every week or two. And I have 6 other games with different degrees of priority that I also have to be competing with this one for table time at the, every other week designer events that I'm able to get out to. And so I don't really have solutions for how one deals with those decisions, except that they're hard decisions and you have to make them. But I did like the point, and this is something I learned from John too. I was lucky enough to spend 2 years in Mountain View, and John Brieger is part of my regular playtesting group, and to hang out with him every week. Is that you can actually get a lot more out of even single playtests by simply stepping back and paying attention to more things than just what the players are doing, but also what they're saying. Doing a bit of educating yourself a little bit about how to run focus groups and how to do semi-structured interviews, a long way to helping you get more material to work with, more perspectives and ideas out of those fewer, more precious playtests that you might have access to if you're a freelancer or just a hobby designer.
Yeah, I would totally agree. We have some other questions. So I'll ask Adam Young's question next. He asks, what are good signals that an element is superfluous? That's a great word. Or that something is missing. What do you think? Chris, we'll go to you on this one.
I think that if an element being superfluous, I think that if it's often a rule that's forgotten or ignored, I think is a good indication that something is superfluous. If something is missing, I think that like really what you're looking for again is trying to be mindful of your what you want the experience to be, and seeing if things match that or not. I think that that's kind of one of the core elements to the way that I look at, for example, designing like licensed products. Is for me, if I'm looking at designing something that's for a license, the first thing I do is try to identify the core essence of that license. Well, I guess the first thing I do is try to figure out, if I'm a fan of this property, am I looking for a super accurate simulation of this property, or am I looking for something more tonally, as part of that property? Like, for example, when we worked on Jurassic Park, my big thing was like, I think that the idea of being on a park full of dinosaurs and trying to survive is actually more important than the narrative beats of hitting every narrative beat in the film, point by point. I think what people want is they want to run from dinosaurs, and then dinosaurs want to eat people. Like that's what you want. And so that's kind of what we created. But, and that's why in that game we were kind of watching it, and the dinosaurs, it wasn't feeling threatening from the beginning of the game. And so I'm like, well, we need to make this board smaller, because from turn 1 I want dinosaurs to be biting people. Like I want to start the dinosaurs are broken out. Like we're starting in the middle of the movie. Like let's get people into the stuff they want. And so that was something that was missing from that experience, was that sort of tension, that immediate kind of fear that the human players were feeling.
So that was what was missing. And so you fixed that by putting the game in medias res, right? So right in the middle of the action, bam.
Right. Yeah,
we're starting off getting our butts bit off by velociraptors.
Yeah. I mean, that's what people want. That's what people go to Jurassic Park.
I know, that's what I want. I want to get my butt bit off.
Yeah, absolutely. Small butt.
I enjoyed the hell out of Jaws when I got to play it over the summer, because I thought it did such a good job actually of like sort of recreating the moments, the cinematic moments that, like I would want to experience in a Jaws game. Like I got to be the shark, which was good because that's just good that I got to have that power position. But I mean, I really liked like the hide and seek aspect, and then I loved destroying the boat. It was really, and I liked how there was the 2 phases too. So yeah, I thought it was a great.
All the touchstones, right?
Yeah, I thought it did a great job.
And what about you, Kathleen? How do you know that an element is, more than what's necessary in a game, or how do you know that something's not in a game that should be in a game?
Well, I mean, I think generally speaking is, if you're putting in things to solve problems that you don't know how to fix as part of like the overall gameplay, in my mind, it's something that probably will need to come out later once the game itself becomes more clearly and tightly defined. I played a game this past weekend on Sunday at Stonemeyer Design Day here in St. Louis, and there was this game where they had a couple different types of economy, 3 different types of economies going on, and they were sort of related, but sort of not, and thematically. And for me, I was just like, strip this out. This is where your game is. I don't know how you're going to fix this part to make it connect to that, but basically take 2 of these 3 economies out, because all they're doing is getting in the way of me experiencing what this game is supposed to be. And I think that's, and in the beginning stages of a game, when you're just trying to get your ideas out there, it totally makes sense that you're just going to like throw it all out there, see what sticks. But you have to be good at, it's one of the hardest things. I asked last year at Tabletop Network, Rob Davio was presenting, and I said, how do you know when an idea is bad? And, and it's time to like have it, like to pull it or whatever. And he's like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like it's hard at every level, sometimes to come up with those things. Yeah. And I guess if something's missing, it just, yeah, I agree with Chris. What's the experience you want players to have? And don't solve it with an event deck. I hate event decks. If the game is
another deck of cards.
If a game is a forest fire and then you use an event deck to throw a nuclear bomb on top of it, what burned what? Solve one problem, don't throw in a second one.
Yeah. I think that in a lot of ways it's almost easier to identify the things that are kind of superfluous sometimes, I feel like, because they stick out. It's like it's like it's like you get a splinter. It's like I'm running my hand across this thing and this doesn't feel exactly right. Like it's almost more visceral. To find something that's missing, I think, and I forget the gentleman's name, but Kathleen and Jesse both mentioned him, the idea of really taking a full comprehensive observation of the playtest and really trying to like collect as much data as possible with all of your senses. Hear what listen to what they're saying, watch their body language, watch those things, and like focus on those kind of moments to kind of that you want to heighten or take away. And I think one of the questions that I like to ask myself, and I've actually the first time I asked this during a playtest, there was a designer that was playtesting something. And he's a good friend of mine, and I was having a great time. I thought the game was really fun, but it wasn't quite clicking. It was a little bit too much. And so I said, what part of this game is fun for you? And he took it as like, I wasn't enjoying the experience. And he's like, wow, that's kind of rude. But what I was really getting at was like, there's a lot of good stuff here, but like, what is the thing that you like about this? Like, and why do you like that? And then let's put stuff around that supports that element and get rid of the stuff that doesn't necessarily support that exact thing that you want. And a lot of times, if you're honest with yourself when you're designing something, you're saying, what's the part that I want to be fun? You'll realize that you have this cool element, and because of just the way that we design and the way that we maybe kind of overdevelop things, we've added all these other parts to it that no longer serve that core function of what was fun in the first place. And so sometimes it's important to like say like, and I guess that's what it's missing, right? Like if you really love this auction mechanism, what you might be missing is the thing that makes that necessary for players, or the thing that makes players, want to engage more with that system that you've created that you really love.
Right. Interestingly enough, this question is for you, Chris, and we can all answer it, but he asked it to you specifically. What makes something over-designed?
Oh, that's Zach. Yeah, so I posed a question earlier, and so I was just thinking about this concept of we talk a lot about games that were underdeveloped. You hear that a lot, like with it's like, oh yeah, they just need a little bit more development. And I was like, and I played a game recently, and I was like, you know what? Like, I think this was like overdeveloped. I think they stripped so much away from this game to simplify it down to like, basically like the frame. And I was like, it's missing that magic that I wish was there. And so I just kind of posited the question of something that was like, I was like, can you ever have a game that's over-designed and underdeveloped, or, under-designed and overdeveloped, like those types of things. Mm-hmm. And to me, over-designed, we have a thing at our studio. A lot of times, Jay Wheatley, who's sort of like our studio head, talks about the invisible hand of the designer. And he comes from like an experience creation background. He's like, he hates rules that exist because the math needs them to exist. And like it's like, in this game, if the first player starts with 3 points, the second player starts with 1 point, and the third player starts with a negative 2 point debt or something like that. It's like, we know why that exists. We know it's to balance the game, but it feels like the designer's there and be like, oh, hey, like, I know that this game is unbalanced. Here's how I fixed it, And those types of things to me feel like over-designed. It's when you have to really create like a lot of rules to support this one thing in your game that you really want to be in there, or you really think needs to be in there.
Yeah, I get that. I can see that. What did I say? I said under-designed equals same path to victory. Overdeveloped equals something that no longer fits the designer's intent or vision. That was my answer to that question. Kathleen, what do you think? Overdesigned or underdeveloped, or any of those over/under things that Chris is talking about? What do you think of that?
No, there was one time I played a prototype on tabletop with a designer. He wanted me to take a look at something, and it was a simple, silly little premise about like cats in the house, this cute little theme. But there were like 5 or 6 kind of wheels in the game, 5 or 6 little like kind of like design, like kind of core mechanisms making the game go. And for him, and he said, look, this was like my first game. It was like my workshop, try stuff out game. And I said, yeah, like if you wanted, I think, to make this work, this would need to you need to simplify, combine all that other stuff. And he's like, yeah, I'm just going to put it on the shelf. And so for me, that over design was, when you're putting just too many things in the game, and they might all need to be there to make the game work. But if it's just too much, it's just too much, I don't know if that's a great answer, but over design for me is everything is there.
Right. Mm-hmm. And Jesse, what about you? You had an answer to the question too.
Yeah, well, I briefly reflected on someone else's answer to the question because it struck me as a bit sideways, but I think I think
Fel's also Brazilian, so it might be a language thing. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's possible. I think there's multiple ways that you can over-design. Fel's example was over-designing when you sit down and play those games that have a million extra components and things going on in them, right? A game that hasn't had any kind of looks like it hasn't had any kind of development or tuning done to it, and everything, including the kitchen sink, is still there. For me personally, when I think of over-designed, I think of like really, really, really polished Euro style designs, where you can't help but feel like you're playing a game. Right. and so to me that tracks a lot of my personal tastes in games too. But if I was to ever describe something as overdesigned, it would probably be a really dry, mathematical, probably complex system that is unavoidably a game that I'm currently playing.
Yeah, and perhaps maybe it's something where the rules get in the way of the experience. Does that sound like a good
possibly
heuristic? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
right.
the opposite
Or where
of it
the
is
rules
when
are the experience. You experience
this
the
is
rules.
a game about the rules.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm writing that down,
Yeah.
by the way.
That's good.
Game about rules.
Oh.
Brad has a question. I'm not going to show it on the screen because it's super long, but I will ask the final question that he asked, kind of the roundup. What are some tips that y'all have for dealing with time pressure? So both of you have different types of time pressures. Kathleen, you have a full-time job, and you do this, as a hobby on the side.
Mhm.
How do you deal with the time pressures that you incur on a daily basis?
Well, as best I can. You know what I mean?
Milk and cookies and bourbon.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. I work out. I work out every single morning. That certainly helps with stress. It's easier when things are going well, and when there's a game that's not going well, then it's just like this, black cloud that follows you
Right.
everywhere. When it comes to time pressure, I think you have to really. It's such a non-answer, but like I think you really have to figure out what works for you. I know one time Eric and I were talking about this, and she's like half an hour every day. She does something with games that she's working on. I don't necessarily manage to do that. I mean, there's some advantages I have. Like if I want to play test a game, I can get 15 play tests of it done in a week. Granted, it's all with 13-year-olds, but it's amazing the kind of out of the box thinking that they're capable of, and I've gotten many a good idea from them. But it just, I think the number one thing more than anything else is if you want it to happen, you have to make it a priority for yourself. It's really easy, like Sen said earlier, to like have a game that's perfect in your head, because if you start messing around with it and you discover it's not perfect, then what do you have? And that can be really scary when you're working with something creatively. And you just have to be willing to accept mess and accept that it may not work out the way you want. And you also have to ask yourself, what are you trying to get out of this experience? Are you wanting some outlet from your job? Are you wanting to be able to quit your job and do this full time? Are you wanting to challenge yourself? Are you wanting to make $16 million? You have to ask yourself what your real goals are and tailor your experience to those goals.
Cool. Chris, what about you? What do you find is a deadline pressure for you working with a studio where you do have roughly, you have more ideas at that studio than you have product, and you have 30 products shipping a year roughly. So you must have like hundreds of ideas just floating around that whole facility.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, I think it's a little bit different for us. And for us, it's I'll say the experience of working at our studio as a game designer is a little bit different than working as a freelance designer, because we're talking about deadlines. But what people who might not be familiar with the way that our studio works is because we have all these designers, we have all these graphic designers and illustrators that are at our studio, and we work very quickly. And the way that we work quickly is by working in conjunction. Everyone's working on everything at the same time. So that means that, and we're working with licenses and everything. We're trying to hit deadlines with licenses. So I have checkpoints along the way where it's like, hey, the producer's like, Chris, we need this map locked down by this date because I need to get it to an illustrator, and it's going to take them a month to do the illustration. And if we're going to hit our production deadline, that means so I'm not even I'm having to finalize components and elements of the game as we go along. But I think the interesting thing with deadlines that is sometimes overlooked by people who have never tried working under deadlines, and I was actually talking to Stephanie Straw on the way to work this morning about this, is that deadlines can also be very useful, because a lot of times if I was not doing this for a living, when I was doing Last Garden with my friend Matt and we self-published it, we worked on that game for years. And I'm not sure that extra 9 months that we worked on it really made it like a better game, but we just were constantly working on it. And sometimes the deadline can actually be refreshing, especially like when you're working on so many projects. Like that deadline, like when we ship a project, it's a round of applause. It's a celebration at our studio because like a lot of people worked on those things a lot of hard hours, but then it's done, And is it perfect? Well, no project that we make is ever going to be completely perfect. And is there things that we wish we could take back or wish we could change afterwards? Of course. Like we're it's a creative field. Like we're not solving a math equation. We're creating like an experience for people, and we're not gonna hit it 100% every time. If we can get to like 85%, that's a huge win for us, And so I think that you have to be, when you're working with deadlines, you have to be honest with the people that are giving you the deadlines. And if you're giving yourself the deadline, you have to be honest with yourself, and let them know truly like, what your work rate is, how much you can work. And two, you have to be willing to make decisions quickly and follow your gut a little bit more than you would. You don't, and in some ways, that's the best way of breaking through this creative blocks that we're kind of talking about. Is it's like if you have to make a decision, and you have to just follow that path to its conclusion, like it helps you kind of burst through those hurdles a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would encourage if you're a freelance or a hobby designer, this is a practiced skill that you can actually use. And I would encourage you to try to go for a few months, giving yourselves deadlines on projects, even if they're just artificial deadlines, and see if you can stick to them and see how it feels to try to stick to deadlines. Because I can tell you right now, like when I started at Force Present, it was a trial by fire. Like, I'm not going to, name games, but there were games where when I stepped onto the project, we like had, a few months to get files done for. And like, you had to crank on those. Like you didn't have time to like what Jesse was saying, you don't have the luxury of pursuing every path. So you really have to be very confident in your abilities and confident in your ability to observe playtests and maximize every single playtest, because you're not going to get that many because of the deadline. But it's all stuff that you can learn, and you have to practice it though.
Yeah. Well, and especially the irony is, I guess, that I have students do this every semester or every other semester, depending on how my schedule falls out. So in about 9-10 weeks, they develop a prototype that goes through 3 and hopefully even 4 iterations. So the quality of those prototypes is honestly like really cool for what they know from where they started off as, with most of them being non-gamers whatsoever, And so I always try and say that I'm going to design a game with them, so I'm hitting those same deadlines too. But it's tough. It's really tough. And I think though that Chris's point is a good one, and maybe that's something that I'll do on Twitter, is I'll basically just start giving assignments out for anybody who wants to design along with my students. See who would be fun to see if people would be willing to like work at the same pace that I put them through, and also if I put myself through the same pace that I make them through, because like I said, like with volume, you can find good work.
Yeah, I mean, that's why game jams are so interesting. How much can you get done in a 48-hour, 24-hour, or 2-hour jam? And you'll amaze yourself. Now, Jesse, you started with contests, right? Like the BGG contests.
Yeah, and I don't know if they're still doing it, but when I started design, someone was running monthly design contests on the BGG designer forums. So every month you get a theme like celery, and you'd have 30 days to produce anything.
A celery game.
And I did it for 12 months, and that's how I got my feet wet.
Yeah. Eric Slauson has a thing that he uses. It's just like basically a Mad Lib. I'm a Mad Lib kind of guy. I know Eric is as well. And so he uses cons as his deadlines. I have to have this game ready to show X at Y, like show Z-Man at Origins, or show Greater Than Games at, Geekway to the West, or whatever. And that's a great way of giving yourself a deadline too. That's very functional. And so from that deadline, you can build in everything backwards, right? When you have a deadline, then it makes it easier to kind of put your milestones in play. Like, oh, then a month before that, I have to set my meeting. And, 2 months before that, I should have at least X number of playtests. And 3 months before that, I should have, whatever, the rules semi-finalized. So I love that. I think that's a great way to do it. Yeah, Daniel Rocky is also saying that one of the reasons why he likes to enter game design contests is just because of the deadlines. And Eric is saying again that the game crafter is what got him into design outside of his comfort zone because they have so many contests, and you're working with a deadline.
And Eric is great at visual games too, because he's an artist, and so like his games, like his tattoo stories that's come out, is super cute and fun. But he's such a visual person too, that he always has really intriguing designs and I'm excited to see what comes for him in the future.
Yeah, and to that point, I love that you brought that visual element up, because we talked a little bit earlier about designing within parameters. In a lot of ways, deadlines are just extra parameters, right? So if we know at our studio that we have to turn a game around in X number of weeks, or it's like, well, hey, we can't make Twilight Imperium in this amount of time. This is another constraint. Like, what game could I create with if that time restriction is also one of the parameters I'm working under? So I think it's another good way of kind of like restricting yourself and giving yourself a puzzle to solve. It's like, if I'm entering a contest and I have 2 weeks to make a game, then I have to, okay, what game can I turn out in 2 weeks? And it's not going to be, a complex game. It's going to be something simple,
Right. Yeah, you're right. It's just another constraint to live under. Speaking of time constraints, we're heading up to the last couple of minutes of the show. Jesse, do you have anything that you're interested in asking our panel of experts?
Do you mean the traditional question that I ask the panel of experts?
I mean, you could do that if you really wanted, Jesse.
Is it what gives you the goddamn right? Because that's the best question ever.
You can ask. You definitely ask them that. That's hilarious.
I don't know if I can do that. Kathleen, what gives you the goddamn right?
Cojones. An unreasonable sense of confidence with a surprising lack of product to back it up.
Very nice.
That's a good answer.
Thanks.
That is a good answer.
Yeah, so we are down to our final minutes, though. So it is tradition around here that we ask our guests as our final question if there was one piece of advice that you could give to any number of game designers in the world who might be watching now or listening to our podcast down the line, what one piece of advice would you want to share with them?
Embrace. Go ahead, Chris.
No, you, by all means.
I would say embrace the Stanford design mindsets. You can just Google the image or look them up. Bias towards action. When it comes to thinking about an idea or just starting to like prototype and work it out and start doing it, start doing. Because you'll be thinking as you're doing, and then you'll just iterate so much more rapidly through the process of actually making the thing. Bias towards action, one of Stanford's design mindsets.
That's basically what I was going to say. And I think it's true. Absolutely. Kathleen says it in a much more eloquent way than I would. At our studio, me and Deirdre Cross started a joke. Because a lot of people will say like fake it till you make it, that kind of thing. And so what we like to say is make it till you make it. Like, don't just make something until you make it. And that's what you got to do. And that's kind of the mindset that we work under is, just do what you want to be doing.
Right.
Great. Those are awesome. So on that note, Jess, I'm just going to go through the list here and say hello to everybody because I didn't get everybody's name. Matt Paquette, hello. Zach Connolly, one of our great moderators, hello. Who else do we got here? More Zach, more Matt. Adam Young down in Sarnia, come and visit us in London and Kitchener. We would love to play your games at sometimes. Jesse Fernandez. Steph Straw was on. Let's see who else is here. Brad Batchelor, thanks for the questions. Daniel Rocky, you're wonderful. If you guys get a chance, by the way, to play Daniel's game that Daniel and Gerald Chow made, which is, what's the name of the game, Jesse? Because it used to be something else. Artemis Project. I still call it Merchants of Venus, or not Merchants of Venus, but the something of Venus. Artemis Project. Great game. Let's see. Eric Slosson's on. Good. And Julie Ahern, our last week's guest, has come back to say hello. So let's talk about the last few things on our list, Jesse. We've got to give one more plug to ProtoTO. It's happening this weekend. So ProtoTO happens at 12 p.m. lunch. We open, well, I don't open, I'll be there, but Pam opens the doors at the Holiday Inn downtown in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. We will have our table there. Jesse, myself, and Erica will be there all weekend, live streaming right to here. So do pay attention to the links. We'll throw them up, and you can watch what we're doing at ProtoTO, which will be interacting with all the designers that are there, giving them some advice, looking over their sell sheets, playtesting our games, playtesting their games. We're just going to be doing stuff, and it'll be wonderful. And then the other things to connect to us, obviously, you can reach us on the Meeple Syrup page, the Meeple Syrup Shop Talk page, where you can discuss things like what is something that is underdeveloped or overdesigned. Those are great questions that Chris asks on those pages. So come join in the talk because it's wonderful. Remember, if you are a podcast listener, you can find all of our stuff, as well as, excuse me, some great role-playing, actual plays and discussions on the Roll to Play Network, our wonderful hosts. And then finally, if you are interested in any of our supplemental material, be it having early access to our infograms, we need to make a new one, Jess. We're late on our infograms, infographics. Yeah, we not late, but I mean, we should do one. And check out our Patreon, because we have a lot of cool stuff. One of our really well-attended panels from Fan Expo, Kathleen was a superstar there, so that was great. And you can hear the podcast of the education and gaming podcast recording when I get it done up there. I'm working on the contracts one right now. Mm-hmm. So we'll get a couple of them up, one maybe every week, every 2 weeks. But the only way you can get them is if you back us on Patreon. So it's www.patreon.com/meeplesyrup. And you can subscribe for as low as $1 a month. That's like less than a latte. And that would help us create more content for you. And if you can support us, we would appreciate it. So thank you very much. And thanks to our guests, Kathleen, Mercury, and Chris Rowlands, who are wonderful designers. Make sure you check out Funkoverse, which is dropping into stores like in a couple days.
Next week, yeah. Some stores leaked it early, but you know, what can you do?
Right. So if you want to play as Rose or Blanche, or Batman or Robin, or there's no Robin yet, is there?
There's Robin, yeah.
There's Robin's in
the versus Robin.
One. Yeah, hey, Blanche.
Sky's the limit.
Or the Harry Potter people. There you go. Grab that. And next year in 2020, we'll be on the lookout for Kathleen's game, which is Ragnarok.
Dirty Bird.
Right. Not Dirty Birdies, and not. I called it Dirty Dragons. I'm sorry.
No, that was the working title for a long time.
I know. That's what when I played it was Dirty Dragons. So
yeah,
Ragnarok is the best name though.
Yes, it really is.
Yeah, people would know if they're going to be drag queen dragons, and I'm like, I wish.
Either way,
there are now.
Win-win.
There will be now. Oh, and thank you very much, Arissa Roy Dupuis. We'll see you at ProtoTO, I hope, Arissa. Anyway. Next week, I'm not sure who we have on the show next week. Jesse, who is it? Let's take a look.
Oh, no. I just had that up.
Well, Jesse.
But I put it away.
Well, why?
Well, I wanted to pay attention to my guests.
Well, you know,
they're
just our guests.
I appreciate it, Jesse. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Oh, we're having Pam. We're having Pam next week.
Oh, right. It's just Pam.
Oh,
no,
I'm coming.
With Pam.
Yeah, that's right. We're doing
questions.
Good.
We're doing a ProtoTO retrospective.
Yeah, like a wrap up and a reflection on ProtoTO, which is our local prototyping convention, which Pam runs. And then, you know, if you're interested in learning how to run your own, Pam is a legit event coordinator. That is what she does as her job. And so she knows all the ins and outs, and maybe she'll field some questions from you. So do come next week. We will see you then. Thank you so much for coming. We need that sizzling bacon sound. Where's the sizzling bacon sound? I don't know how to do the outro anymore. Oh yeah, do it with your voice, Jesse. That's it. Okay, that's that.
No,
I would not eat that bacon.
Syrup trickling from trees.
That's like,
we're looking for an outro. Yeah, we're looking for an outro phrase still. So, hey, maybe it's the one that's on the screen right now. Maybe it's make it till you make it. But then, you know, Funko would probably sue us.
TM. Yeah. Our lawyers are already en route to Canada.
Right?
Yeah, they're coming for you then.
All right, we'll see you all later. Thank you very much, and good night.
Good night. Thank you for listening to the Meeple Syrup Show. If you'd like to support us on all of our projects, please check out our Patreon page. We can be found at www.patreon.com/MeepleSyrup. Until next time, make some great games.